I love the bulletin cover art, don't you? Do you mind? Jane Lavender said to me this morning as she walked in, she said, "I'm going to be irreverent." And I'm like, "What?" She goes, "Rub-a-dub-dub, 3 kings in a tub." I mean, look, you even got the little rivers flowing towards it. Thank you for that. Thank you for being here. It's good to be back together with you again after being gone for a week. It's been amazing to me how the rhythms of life were disrupted a little bit. And it was a great, wonderful trip out to Nebraska to see dear Evan Hansen. I don't think I've ever cried so much in my life. But it's good. It's good to have Jane walk in the door and to make me laugh with something irreverent. I don't think that's irreverent. I think that's great. But it's good to get back into these patterns, back into these ways of doing things, because we're all seeking something, aren't we? What is it that you are seeking? Everybody is seeking something. That's why Google is one of the most profitable companies on earth. People go to Google every day to search for information, an astounding array of subjects. People are seeking more information on the latest crises that are in the news. They're seeking the latest numbers of the pandemic. They're seeking information about how to help with this rising mental health crisis. I heard something very interesting this week that piqued my attention so much that I texted to some friends. It said that the pandemic has only accelerated what we already knew was happening. The pandemic has only accelerated what we already knew was happening. Everybody is seeking something. What is it that you are seeking? Maybe it's not information. Maybe it's hope. Maybe it's truth. Maybe it's peace. Maybe you're searching for that great new product that's going to make everything work out right, or so the ad suggests. Maybe you're looking for a new relationship or a new mate. ChristianMingle.com promises to find you God's perfect match for you. No, that's not a recommendation. Speaking of mates, a young woman was sitting in a coffee shop telling her friends about her perfect mate. The man I marry must be a shining light when with friends. He must be musical, tell jokes, and sing, and stay home at night. And an old lady sitting at the next table overheard her and spoke up. "Girl, what you just described is my computer." Perfect relationships, perfect mates are hard to come by, with the exception of my wife, of course. Don't tell me I can't think on my feet in the pulpit. What is it that you are seeking? Everybody is seeking something in life. Let's switch a little bit. Herod. King Herod. What is it that he was seeking? Herod was seeking to preserve his power. As we've discussed, as you've heard over the years many times, Herod had a certain kind of character or a lack thereof. He was a bloody tyrant. He lived in perpetual darkness. He was ruthless, murdering his wife, his 3 sons, his mother-in-law, his brother-in-law, his uncle, and many others. And the crowning jewel, of course, of his murderous life were the infant boys in Bethlehem in a vain attempt to maintain power by killing the newborn king of the Jews. Everybody seeks something. Philosopher Plato once wrote, "We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when adults are afraid of the light." Let me read that again. We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when adults are afraid of the light. Herod was afraid of the light, and so he sought to extinguish it. The world was in darkness. Ignorance and evil prevailed, even as they do today. But darkness never has the last word. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not, will not ever overcome it. That is the message of Epiphany. Light has come into this world. So if you're a confirmand, get out your pencil and you might want to write this down. I once asked a confirmand to summarize the gospel in a few words. And she responded like this. In the Bible, it gets dark. Then it gets very, very dark. And then Jesus shows up. Isn't that profound? In the Bible, it gets dark. Then it gets very, very dark. And then Jesus shows up. Herod was seeking to preserve his position of power. Power is still a dangerous motive in people's hearts. There are Herods in company offices. There are Herods in service institutions. There are Herods in homes. There are even Herods in church. And like Herod, they're all driven by the need to maintain power. So let's move on from this before anyone thinks I'm talking about them, because I'm not, okay? Let's move on to the chief priests. The chief priests and the teachers of the law. What were they seeking? They're seeking to maintain the status quo. That's all they wanted to do, was to preserve tradition. Hasn't that been the role of religion? To maintain tradition? It's both a strength and a weakness of the church that we love, for things to remain the same. Maybe that's why the church is so resistant to change. I can tell you that I have pastored in and have worked for congregations where someone has walked up to me, not just one, many different congregations, they say, if you ever put a screen up in my sanctuary, I'm taking my husband's ashes and we're out of here. Well, we already have screens. We have 2 of them, as a matter of fact, so hopefully we're heading in the right directions with some of these things, right? Sometimes we have to bring the church kicking and screaming into today's world. That's how it was in the first century. That's why they hung Jesus on a cross. Because he upset the status quo. Anybody here know Philip Yancey, the author? Right? We all love Philip Yancey. In his wonderful book, The Jesus I Never Know, he tells about the impact that a film had on him as a young man. The movie was by an Italian director, Pasolini. And it's a very controversial movie called The Gospel According to St. Matthew. Anyone ever seen it? Google it. It's worth a view. The interesting thing is that Pasolini how he came to want to produce this movie. He was trapped in a huge traffic jam when the Pope was visiting Florence, Italy. So Pasolini checked into a hotel room where he got bored, and so he picked up the Bible in his bedside table, and he read through the Gospel of Matthew. What he discovered in those pages startled him so much that he was determined to make a film using no other text than the actual words from St. Matthew. So if you want something to read, a book of the Bible to start with the Gospel of Matthew. What emerged was a film that presented Jesus using only Matthew's text. To the young people of the 1960s, it was the Jesus that was very much like themselves. Anti-materialistic, anti-hypocritical, pro-peace, and pro-love. Yancey had never experienced a Jesus like this. For me, he writes, the film helped to force a disturbing reevaluation of my image of Jesus. In physical appearance, Jesus favored those who would have been kicked out of Bible college and rejected by most churches. Those in authority, whether religious or political, regarded him as a troublemaker, a disturber of the peace. Obviously, the only way to deal with such a troublemaker is in the Gospels. That's what we do with troublemakers, isn't it? We silence them with a cross, or a gun, or prison, or social isolation. We love the status quo as much as the chief priests and the teachers of the law did. So a little review. 1, Herod sought to maintain his power. 2, the religious leaders sought to maintain their traditions. And 3, finally, there were the wise men, the magi, the scholars. They were foreigners, probably Gentiles. All that means is they're not Jewish, okay? Gentiles just means they're not Jewish. But they were seeking the newborn king of the Jews. It's a shame that the wise men couldn't have used Google or Siri or a GPS to find the innocent babe. Instead, they used what? A star, a bright light. The heavens led them to the firstborn child in Jerusalem. Henry Van Dyke wrote one of the most famous fictional accounts of the Magi. the story of the other wise men. In this story, Van Dyke speaks about the fourth wise man who searched for years for the Christ child, but was never able to catch up with the others. And the wise man had sold everything that he had. He was a very wealthy man, came from a wealthy family, right? That's what scholars and magi and people like that were, right? He sold everything, and he had 3 precious jewels. The gift of wealth, which he intended to give to the newborn king. But in his journey, he came across people who had great needs that he could not pass up without trying to help. He ended up using all 3 of the jewels that he had intended to offer to the Christ child to care for the needs of persons that he didn't previously know, people that he found in their need. The fourth wise man searched for Jesus for the rest of his life, only to realize at the end of his life that he had both found him and worshiped him. Each time he gave himself. Each time he gave the gift of the one who was in need. Through his compassion, the fourth wise man pushed back some of the world's darkness. And that is our task as well. We are to live in the presence of Christ so that with time we'll be able to reflect his light in other people's darkness, in service to their needs. So again, quick review. Herod, seeking power. Chief priests, teachers of the law, seeking to maintain the status quo. But the Magi, the wise men, right? They're seeking to worship him so that their worship of him might turn into action. You don't travel that far just to say, congratulations, yay, a new baby boy. You travel that far because you are seeking transformation. You give those gifts because you want to act on what God is offering. You do realize that's why we worship, don't you? We worship to be infected by love. We worship that we might ingest love. We worship that we might become love out there in this cold, dark, wet world. And so I ask you one last time, what is it you are seeking? Friends, my guess is that you came here this day genuinely seeking God. And you realize the dangers in life of seeking anything else. You realize the danger of seeking power or wealth or pride, even an attachment to the way things used to be. Like the wise men, we must lay our every motive in the life of this child of Bethlehem. Amen. Amen.